Igual a veces no acompaña, si lo siento atrás y no desarrollo lo grabo. Pero es cuando igual es obvio. O sea, aquí está. Yo no lo tengo controlado, pero esa distancia es lo mismo. Sí. Nada que hacer.
¿Samane nos puede escuchar?
Hi, Samane.
Hi, how are you?
Aquí no parece. Pero ahora se ve internet.
Can you hear me?
They are just. Ah. Hola, 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 hola. Hola. ¿Me escuchan? Yo me escucho. Samane, can you listen to me? Yes.
I can hear you, but I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Oh, great. Yo no la
Okay,
escucho.
perfect. So should I
Hola.
get started or what? How are we
Jota, puedes
going?
hablar para ver si escucho. Ay, Samane. Ya, yo no escucho el J. Benja. Sé que nada más escuché bien, un lío porque nada más caché que.
Should I start the presentation or are we waiting for something?
¿Quién está hablando? No sé qué no habló.
I see.
Ya se me va a
All right. Four. Yeah. No, that's fine. I see.
Ya se me va a
All right. Four. Yeah. No, that's fine. I see.
Ya se me va a
Four.
¿Hablo? ¿Ahora? Hola. También para ver si el tuyo funciona. ¿Me probando? Jota, ¿puedes hablar un poquito más fuerte, por favor? Ahí, porque no te escuchábamos. Renato escucha. Yo a Renato lo escucho mejor que a ti, Jota. A Renato lo escucho mejor que a ti. Y yo creo que es porque los parlantes están para allá. Y yo creo que ellos escuchan mejor que nosotros. Sí. ¿Ya? Sí, sí, se escucha mejor, Jota. Es un poco incómodo igual. Javi, ¿va a hablar alguien ahí? Ya. ¿Y a qué hora viene?
Estamos atrás.
¿Partimos? No. Les pido disculpas, vamos a partir como en un minuto, 1 o 2 minutos. ¿Por qué más?
sí.
Yes, I can hear you.
Estoy por acá.
Yes.
Ah, pero ahí viene. Vamos. ¿Y agüita? Habla. Aquí. Más cerca. Cerca del micrófono.
Estoy acompañando en este momento.
Hola, buenos días a todas, a todos, a todes. Good morning in London and in London too.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon for you.
Solo Samani.
Samani. Hi, Samani. Welcome
good,
to
I'm
the Centro
good.
Nacional de Arte Contemporáneo. It's so nice to have you here today.
Thank you.
Bueno, para nosotras es realmente muy importante poder ir cerrando esta exposición que hemos alojado ya por más de 2 meses con mucha alegría y con mucha reflexión. Es una exposición que nos ha permitido realizar una serie de actividades para distintos tipos de público. Y sin duda era muy importante poder ir avanzando, instalar la conversación, como siempre lo comentamos con Jocelyn, curadora, y Angélica, asistente curatorial de esta exposición. Ha sido muy importante para el centro poder estar mostrando las investigaciones, los trabajos de Forensic Architecture, una agencia, una colectiva que sin duda tiene un gran reconocimiento internacional por el trabajo que realizan. Así que solamente quisiera darles la bienvenida, desear que sea una jornada de mucha reflexión, mucha conversación y que de alguna manera nos mantenga siempre presente estos temas que son temas tan necesarios de discutir, que nos atraviesan diariamente. Esta muestra está enmarcada dentro de la programación de actividades que ha hecho el Centro Nacional de Arte Contemporáneo en conmemoración de los 50 años del golpe de Estado. Esta programación nosotros la iniciamos el año pasado y va a continuar hasta el próximo año. Y por lo mismo era muy significativo para el centro poder realizarla en este contexto. Así que junto con agradecer a Jocelyn y Angélica, quiero también y muy especialmente agradecer a Forensic Architecture a través de Samane, porque realmente creemos que para nosotros como institución, pero también para nuestros públicos, esta ha sido una gran exposición. Así que muchísimas gracias a todas y a todos. Y nada, dejo la palabra a Jocelyn y Angélica para dar inicio a esta jornada esta mañana.
Gracias, Sole. Muchas gracias por estar acá, primero que todo, en estas 2 conversaciones que vamos a tener hoy, que están en el marco del cierre de la exposición Atmósferas de Terror, que como presentaba Sole, se enmarca en la conmemoración de los 50 años. El encuentro de hoy, que se llama Violencias, Resistencias y Prácticas Investigativas, junto a mi colega Angélica lo pensamos como una instancia para encontrarnos y poder discutir algunos asuntos que nos parece que son muy pertinentes hoy en día y que cruzan de varias maneras la muestra y cada una de las investigaciones que está en la muestra. Para eso estoy muy contenta de tener con nosotros a Samane, quien nos va a acompañar hoy y que va a hacer una presentación y que en verdad nos complace mucho. Samane es asistente de dirección de investigación de Forensic Architecture y se encarga de la supervisión conceptual de los proyectos y supervisa el Centro de Naturaleza Contemporánea. Su investigación se centra en el desarrollo de nuevas técnicas probatorias de violencia medioambiental. Samane es doctora por la Asociación de Arquitectura y licenciada y máster en Arquitectura por la Universidad de Tecnología de Sydney. Antes de incorporarse a la agencia, a Forensic, ejerció como arquitecta en Australia y también impartió clases en la Universidad Tecnológica de Sydney y de diseño urbano en Bartlett School del University College of Londres, perdón, y dirigió varios cursos breves en el Royal College of Arts. Samane, es un gusto de verdad poder escucharte hoy y esperamos con ansia lo que nos vas a compartir.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I kind of want to start by saying that it's kind of, I'm sorry that my colleague Hannah Martin could not join me today. She's of course the lead of our Colombia-based investigations, many of which are exhibited at the exhibition, and you can view them. She couldn't take part in the forum because she's on strike, in solidarity with the global strike for Palestine and to increase international pressure on Israel to stop the blockade and siege. And so she kind of, and so it's because of this event actually that I also thought to reorganize a little bit what I'm going to speak about. Of course, what I'll share with you has a lot to do with the work on cloud studies, and the work of part of which is the kind of like is the investigation that we did on Plaza de la Dignidad on the use of tear gas. But I want to start with what is happening today and right now, and I want to speak to the context that we're in. Let me do, so I want to do a kind of a share screen, if that's a possible, it's disabled. Do you think you could give me share screen options? I don't seem to be able to share screen. Now it works. Thank you so much for setting that up. I'll open up my PowerPoint. Okay, so I wanted to start here and have on screen an investigation, a kind of a research that the Forensic Architecture Investigative Unit at the Palestinian Human Rights Organization Al-Haq published at the beginning of last week, which had to do with how the quote-unquote safe routes are being bombed, and so the Gazan civilians have are even afraid of leaving their home, despite the kind of like the order. On the morning of, and I'm gonna read. I will apologize if what I'll present is a little bit broken here and there, but that really speaks to the context that we're in at the moment. A big part of our team are deeply invested in Palestine, and they're working on it as I'm here with you. I'll start with a quote from a militant essay published by Verso Books about a kind of like about 10 days ago. On the morning of Saturday, 7th of October, the military army of Hamas, supported by other Palestinian factions based in the occupied Gaza Strip, launched Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Most Western national newspapers and commentators immediately began reporting, many repeating the same mantra. The Palestinians started the war against Israel. The Independent, for example, reports that Israel retaliates with strikes. The New York Times reports that Hamas attacks and Israel declares war, while the Sunday Telegraph calls it Israel's 9/11 moment. Throughout this coverage, and not unlike the media framing of the September 2001 attacks at the time, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood is consistently treated as the year zero, with Western press representing Israel warfare as a new development in response to Hamas's surprise attack. But the written record of Israel's cut and paste Nakba policies on the Palestinian people is longer and deeper than the past week. Operation Al-Aqsa Flood is not a momentary or one-off attack. It is the latest stage of an anti-colonial struggle for self-determination. So I want to actually speak to this long history, many of which you can see as part of the work that we have been exhibiting. During the 2008 and 2009, like the work that we're exhibiting in the context of cloud studies. During the 2008 and 2009 war on Gaza, known in Israel as Operation Cast Lead, videos captured a little-known type of airborne munition, low luminous clouds arriving with a kind of a thunderclap, often less than 100 meters above the roofline. Tentacles of clouds arcing slowly towards the ground in a loose cone shape, burning through any surface they encountered as they descended, often igniting secondary fires. This is the kind of like a reconstruction that we had done of these tentacles, arcing slowly towards the ground in this kind of a conic shape, and burning anything that they would touch. The clouds were the result of white phosphorus shells. White phosphorus can cause severe injuries, burning directly through skin and bones. On contact with oxygen, it produces a toxin, irritant smoke. On one occasion during the conflict, the shells set ablaze a UN school where civilians were seeking shelter. We worked on this case at the time, and in fact, the Cloud Studies project begins, the video essay begins with that investigation on clouds of white phosphorus. When we submitted our findings, we did submit them at the kind of like we published an official report and we presented our findings. In response, Israel initially denied having used white phosphorus in the conflict altogether. But when images of the distinctive clouds began to circulate in public domain, they claimed instead to have used the white phosphorus as a kind of a smokescreen and in compliance with international law. And then later, they said that they will stop using white phosphorus because they they joke that they don't photograph well. And of course, those of you who've been following what's been happening in the past 2 weeks, you do recall videos and images of the use of white phosphorus again in Gaza and in the border with Lebanon. Now I want to go to 2014, where the kidnapping of an Israeli soldier by Hamas resulted in 4 days of bombardment in which over 2,000 homes were destroyed. I play a clip from our investigation, the investigation that we did with Amnesty International on Israel's airstrikes at this time. Through a process of locating cameras and incidents within a digital model and subsequent analysis of satellite and ground level images, smoke clouds, shadows, and impact craters were mapped. Hundreds, and so in this process, kind of, so you know what you see on the screen is an image on one end when you can see the two bomb clouds, and then we have the satellite image, the really high resolution satellite image with which we can see the craters from these bomb clouds, right? The satellite is from after. And so with cross-referencing the two, we were able to kind of mark all the craters in this part of Rafah, and we could map the area of impact from these craters. We mapped hundreds of air-to-surface and artillery strikes that hit the city of Rafah on 1st of August. In our investigation, we used the shape of the cloud as a kind of a clock. So we use the shape of, because in this context, the videos didn't have metadata. And so we use the shape of the cloud because it's morphing, it's changing constantly. We use it as a kind of a metadata so that we could synchronize the various videos that we had looking at the same cloud. And so in that way, we could begin to reconstruct the event with much more high accuracy. This is the kind of one of the concluding maps that we produced, mapping the impact area, the camera cone of vision of all the photo from all the witnesses on the ground, the areas where we had testimonies of what the airstrikes were doing and how people experienced them, and of course the craters. Okay, and so then again, this is also part of the, this is actually what I was showing to you. This is the ending of the cloud studies video essay, as you can see in the exhibition. And now I want to come to one of the kind of like one of the other investigations that is linked to that essay. The year is 2017. This is Selek, a chart local to Palestine, to Gaza to be more specific. It has a mild taste, mild and sweet, maybe earthly even. Selek is edible. There's a beautiful stew that you can cook with it. You can wrap rice in it, right? The way that you would do with wine leaves. You cook with salak, right? Well, not this one. The markings that you see on this leaf are signs of exposure to herbicide, i.e. the leaf is exposed to herbicide the same way a film is exposed to light. Each marking holds a memory of spraying. The leaf, its image, was given to us by Gazan field workers at Ein Media Gaza. And so an image of this salak was sent to us along with images of other kinds of herbs. For example, zucchini. For example, basil or peas. For example, spinach. Palestinian crops along the eastern border of Gaza were dying en masse 2 times a year, in January and in April, right before their harvest time. We were asked to investigate. The field workers of Ein Media Gaza also sent us videos. This is an early morning on the 9th of January. We're in Khan Yunis, the eastern border of Gaza. The camera is following an Israeli crop duster spraying herbicide. You can see that it's kind of like it's moving, it's getting close to the ground, and then it starts spraying. If you listen carefully, you would be able to hear the wind. And you can also see this in the kind of smoke cloud that is coming out of this Israeli watchtower on the border. You can see that the cloud is kind of going towards one side. It is for this wind and its weaponization that today I want to foreground the not kind of like today, but the kind of the film, the video essay Cloud Studies. Its aim was to foreground the necessity for developing new investigative methods for mapping toxic clouds that escape the lens of the camera and drift before depositing on the ground. Clouds that are enmeshed in colonial and military forms of violence. This is another incident of aerial spraying, early morning on April 5th, same place. The GPS location of the field worker confirms the site. And you can recognize the spatial features, like the watchtower, you know, at the back. We reconstructed the camera cone of vision by cross-referencing measurements of objects. For example, you know, you could see in the kind of like in the frame that was before, we measured the size of the watchtower, we mapped it on the map, and we kind of, with that, we could reconstruct the cone of the vision. When we do that, then things will get quite easy, because then we can build the camera, put it in the 3D model, and then measure things really accurately. The distance between things can be measured in a very accurate way. Around this camera, we built the 3D model of the landscape, the plane, and most importantly, its path as it sprayed herbicide. We studied this crop duster really carefully. We studied the duration of each spraying, for example, which was a few seconds long. How close to the ground was it when it was doing the spraying, and what kind of a distance from the ground it was doing this, right? So it dips in, it does the spraying, and then it dips out again. We were studying the time between the sprayings, which was, in this case, you can see a few seconds long again. And we were also studying the direction. So in this case, the crop duster is going up, it's doing a kind of a U-turn, and it's coming back again to spray this area that it just sprayed once more. I'm not sure if you're hearing the sound also or not, but the field workers were taking this video. Imagine, put yourself in their shoes, right? It's their crops. They're looking at the video, they're looking at the crop duster, they can see that it's spraying herbicide, and they know that within a few days all of their crops are going to be burned, nothing will be left, all the work that they did in the past months, it's all gonna go, right? And yet, I mean, and they film it, but they film it with the hope that maybe someone else will also see this, and maybe from the position that they're standing they can stop the continuation of aerial spraying. Maybe there is a way, maybe this video reaches an alternative avenue for bringing accountability, an avenue that is not that is not available to the Palestinians, to the Gazans, from the position that they're that they're standing in. We examined the flight paths in relation to one another, and then in relation to the border. You can see the border kind of highlighted in white in this image. We could see that the paths are really close to one another, and they're very close to the border, but they're on the Israeli side of the border. So the question was, how is it that the planes, why is it that the planes are spraying herbicide so close to the border? And how is it that it's the Palestinian crops that are being burnt and not the Israeli ones? We realized that the 3D model that we had built was missing the environment. It was missing the actor. It was missing the wind. We worked with a scientist from the Imperial College, Dr. Salvador Navarro Martinez, to reconstruct the wind in our model. We asked them to base it on the exact meteorological conditions of this early morning hour in Khan Yunis. For example, we asked them to take into account humidity, the wind direction, the temperature, and then to simulate the movement of the particles in time and in space. So the kind of the dots that you can see here are the particles, and the kind of the surface that you can see is the deposits of this herbicide on the ground. And so here on this side, you can see the concentration of deposits. Our analysis showed that toxic herbicide was traveling kind of like was being carried with the wind, right? It was being carried with the wind, and it was depositing on the ground. It was traveling something up, like it was traveling around 350 meters into Gaza. These are harmful concentrations of herbicide that are traveling this much, like, 350 meters. The result from our simulation corresponded with the result from our remote sensing. So the result from our simulation corresponded with the result from our remote sensing. We compared satellite images from the time of the spraying and 5 days after, the time it takes for herbicide to kill the plants. And then we did a normalized vegetation index study on it. Red here shows loss of vegetation, and green shows stability or no change. Our remote sensing showed that the result is not confined to the region we have been looking at in Khan Yunis, but it is consistent all along the border. The arrow here is pointing to the border, the Gazan border. Through an FOI that we did, we learned that the spraying is advised to only occur in the morning when the breeze is going from the land to the sea, from the Israeli side of the border to the Gazan side of the border, from east to west. I want to step out from this kind of point of view of a satellite and go back to the ground. And sit in the position of a journalist, Sharif Abdul Khoddous, looking up into the sky. This is the same, he's standing on the same border during the Great March of Return in 2018. An Israeli drone is dropping tear gas on people gathering on the ground. In the foreground are the very agricultural farms that grow selek. Sometimes our director Eyal Weizman writes, one toxic cloud enables another. In cloud studies, the project we're exhibiting, we speak around our investigation on the wind, the way it is used to carry clouds of toxins across the eastern border of Gaza in Khan Yunis to kill the Palestinian crops. And the way that it is used to suppress urban social movements, in this case, the roundabout of Plaza de la Dignidad in Santiago. We're now at the point of view of a protester on the 20th of December, 2019, as in a year after the kind of the video of the tear gas in Khan Yunis. The videographer is trying to enter the roundabout, which you can see is cordoned off. You can see the kind of cordons on this side. Near her are Chilean students, labor union activists, queer and feminist advocacy groups, and indigenous people. To push people out, the Chilean security forces occupied the air of the roundabout with a chemical toxin that is tear gas. This is what we were told by our collaborators on the ground, no más lacrimogenes. They asked us to investigate the occupation of the air by this toxic cloud. To do the investigation, we used a video from a kind of like a camera on an artist-run space called Galleria Sima. We marked the extent of each and every cloud with a frame in purple and logged the approximate location of the source, the canister, with a kind of a small cross. For example, here you can see also we're not just talking about the kind of like, you can see this cloud of tear gas that is carried by the wind, right? So you have the car coming, rotating in this particular way, conscious of the way the wind moves. And so then the cloud is carried by the wind, the same way that it would on the kind of like on the Gazan border. And with that, it pushes the protesters to one side. The focus of our investigation actually was here. It was 10 minutes of the stay between 8:30 and 8:40. At this point, sorry, let me go back. At this point, the police escalated the use of tear gas. Our system identified at least 82 canisters deployed within a space of a 10 minutes. And kind of like, you know, in those 10 minutes, then the roundabout is cleared after the kind of the occupation of the air with 82 canisters. This is cloud 476 on this day. This is cloud 486. This is cloud 529. With the location of 594 tear gas canisters accurately mapped within the 3D model, we worked with the same collaborator who together we had invented, we had built a methodology for investigating toxic clouds in Palestine. We borrowed that methodology and we brought it here. We borrowed the methodology that kind of like that was composed to bring accountability to that colonial cloud. We brought it here to investigate these clouds of tear gas. Again, we reconstructed the wind as it billowed through the roundabout, its turbulence, and then we simulated the movement of airborne toxins. Our investigation showed that the surrounding buildings generated irregular turbulences that carried airborne toxins into the larger neighborhood. neighborhood. The wind carried the toxics from southwest to northeast across the roundabout, ultimately depositing them on the ground. The CS particles were carried beyond the perimeter of the roundabout and into the nearby Mapoco River, which we knew kind of like feeds the farms on the southern outskirts of Santiago. So I kind of I end with here, right? Because the exhibition is in Chile, but I want to go back and I want to say the methodology that we used to investigate. I want to emphasize the methodology that we used to investigate clouds of tear gas in Plaza de la Dignidad. This was the methodology that was developed to investigate the toxic clouds of herbicide, the Israeli toxic clouds of herbicide on the eastern border of Gaza. And so I want to kind of like say, I want to end with this line, that how do we bring down these colonial toxic clouds, if not through solidarity? And I want to call you all to action, to do what you can to stop what Israel is doing at the moment.
Ahí sí. Teníamos un problema técnico acá. Y muchas gracias, Samane, por la presentación y por traernos al momento que estamos viviendo, que me parece que es delicado, que es un conflicto que hoy en la mañana cuando venía hacia acá pensaba que nos toca de alguna manera a todas las personas y que tal vez en ese sentir y en ese pensar, que es algo que también nos toca, hay una posibilidad de detener lo que está pasando, que es con lo que tú me parece que terminaste con esta pregunta por un llamado a la acción y detener lo que está sucediendo en este momento en Gaza. Tengo una pregunta, pero en honor al tiempo también quisiera abrir las preguntas al público, si es que hay alguna. ¿No? También una de las cosas que me parece que es muy fundamental y que también está en la exposición es cómo el uso y la creación de las nubes tóxicas generan estos espacios de oscuridad, que es algo que también apareció en todo lo que tú nos presentaste hoy, y cómo esos espacios de oscuridad son creados a propósito y son creados para permitir estas zonas donde se pueden adelgazar y se pueden erosionar los derechos humanos. En ese sentido, te quería preguntar por el lugar de la investigación, eh, por el lugar de una investigación que se hace pública, que me parece que ahí hay una cosa que es muy relevante en el trabajo que ustedes realizan, y cómo esa investigación tiene y busca apoyar la lucha por la autodeterminación de los pueblos. Entonces quería ver cómo que nos contaras y quizás profundizaras en el lugar que tiene esto dentro del trabajo que ustedes realizan.
I'm sorry to ask, Joe, but could you rephrase the question? I'm not sure if I got it correctly.
La pregunta tiene que ver con el lugar que tiene la investigación, en tanto una investigación que se hace pública, que interviene en la esfera pública, y cómo en el trabajo que ustedes realizan, la investigación es una herramienta para apoyar la lucha de pueblos en resistencia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so kind of like going back to what forensics is, etymologically speaking, it means pertaining to the forum, right? So in a way, part of the work of forensics is the kind of like is the putting together of the evidence, of finding and gathering and investigating, and the other part of it is mobilizing the work in forums, building meaningful forums. And so it's never the case that we kind of like we do a work and we just press publish and we forget. No, we actually take it upon ourselves to make sure it is mobilized, it's used by people who can use it, who would be useful to them, right? And that's also precisely why we always do our work in collaboration, never on our own, but in collaboration, so that what we kind of like what we're built is actually there's kind of, you know, so that it can be mobilized. Now, we show our work in different kinds of forums. Sometimes we show them in legal forums, for example, the courts or the tribunals. And inquests. Sometimes we ask for media outlets to relay the work, and in those cases, you know, like we would have a completely different audience, and it would be of a completely different scale that we're speaking about, and it's a different kind of an awareness that we're raising. And sometimes it would be using the kind of the space of cultural venues, like museums and art spaces, such as the space that you guys are sitting in now, as a way of bringing awareness, right? So each forum is able to build a particular kind of an awareness. And I think, in fact, the work of an investigator, like what we try to do is to move the investigation between as many forums as possible in order to build the very many kinds of awareness that is necessary for stopping particular forms of violence. And this is, of course, really this has a totally different scale when it comes to environmental destruction and toxic clouds, because they're kind of like, we still don't have the legal vocabulary for bringing accountability to environmental for environmental destruction. And it's necessary to build other kinds of awareness while the law is kind of catching up, right?
Muchas gracias. Les pido disculpas porque como que yo no entiendo mucho cuándo termina y cuándo viene la próxima pregunta. Tenemos una pregunta. Gracias.
Hola, muchas gracias. En la misma línea de la pregunta inicial, me surgen algunas dudas respecto a el uso de los datos. Porque dado que se planteó que los datos estaban siendo utilizados como nuevas técnicas probatorias, eso supone primero una hipótesis de que la justicia institucional de alguna manera funciona. Entonces, desde ese punto de vista, pienso en la misma línea de cómo apoyamos los pueblos, los grupos y las comunidades, cómo protegemos los datos, ya que son públicos. Entonces, por esa línea va mi pregunta y en relación a no solamente a temas medioambientales, que es lo evidente, pero en el video que vimos arriba aparecía, por ejemplo, ciertas estrategias de los palestinos en relación a su protección, ¿no? Como la quema de neumáticos y generación de nubes, ¿no? Eso también puede ser utilizado como una observación para el Estado de Israel, para hacer una contraataque. Entonces, también por eso pregunto por el tema del uso del dato. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
No, in this case, I mean, we showed the video of the tires and the way that Palestinians mobilized the wind in the evening in order to block the kind of the view of the Israeli snipers. This is an act of resistance. It's not to harm. Like what would a cloud from the burning of a tire do? To kind of like apart, if not only to block views, right? To block the view of a sniper, right? To protect one's safety. I think, but in terms of kind of like what it means to work with data, right? Like I take your, I actually I agree with you very a lot. Like a lot of our discussions is to make sure that if we are working with a video, we're not putting the person who's photographed or kind of like taken it in danger. This is something that we take very seriously. For example, sometimes at times of kind of like in war contexts, if we learn that a video is taken from a private space and revealing the identity of where the video is taken is actually showing the home of a witness who's decided to share what he's seen, that would really put the person in danger, right? So in that kind of a context, we would make sure to only use videos that are taken in public space, so that the location of the kind of videographer cannot be wouldn't be the kind of the identity of the videographer would not be exposed. I think every context requires a different kind of a framework of security, of safe measures, and you can only kind of figure them out by looking very closely. But thank you for raising that, because you know, it would be unethical completely to not consider the videographers and the witnesses on the ground, and to put them in danger in any way.
Hola, yo quisiera preguntar acerca de cómo es el proceso para utilizar estos datos y estas obras como medios probatorios en organismos internacionales de justicia y organismos locales de justicia, y cómo son recepcionados, entendiendo que en general en el mundo del derecho y en el mundo de las organizaciones legales, los medios probatorios son bien estrictos. ¿Cómo es la recepción por parte de estos organismos? Y también, ¿cuál crees tú que es la importancia para arquitectura forense de mezclar o cruzar este umbral, ¿cierto?, que imponen los medios probatorios, que por lo general no hay acceso, ¿cierto?, a medios creativos como medios de prueba?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, and I think also maybe the last one, because I have to go. But proving. Let me use the word truth. There is what we're with the age that we're in. If you're practicing in this kind of like in this discourse of open verification, what it's like, it's all about socializing truth. It's about socializing the access to truth. That truth is not something that can only be decided and discussed behind the closed doors of a court, but it needs to be socialized. It needs to be kind of like, it needs like that the public have a place in it. Not only as listeners, but as investigators. I mean, you can see how open source investigations have been developing around the war on Gaza, and how groups are investigating using open source technologies, right? The article that I started with from the Forensic Architecture Unit of Al-Haq in Palestine, it's using open source techniques in order to investigate the way that the safe roads are being targeted. So I think actually what this means, I think, is hope, right? There are these alternative routes for bringing awareness, for fighting for truth, for socializing the truth, for bringing a shared awareness that maybe weren't there before. But of course, this kind of like this also is not. There's kind of like as much as anything, it's a discourse, and there is a fight around what is actually the kind of like the right analysis. And there are analysis and counter analysis, but this is the kind of like the field that we're very much used to. This is the field of open source research. The way that we kind of like we ourselves think on this is to really kind of, like you do, like exactly the same way that you work in science. Just we explain the methodologies step by step, right? If you look at any of our video investigations, they're actually manuals for how you could do this kind of investigation or another incident of the same caliber. You can follow the steps and you would arrive at the same finding, right? And so I think that's kind of like that's a language that you see common across many of our investigations. I hope that that answers your question.
Mané, sé que te tienes que ir, pero te quería preguntar si podemos tomar la última pregunta.
Okay.
Sofi. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Voy a tratar de hacer una pregunta corta. Samantha, te quería preguntar por el cruce justamente entre práctica artística y activismo, que es un poco el tema de nuestra conversación y que es muy protagonista en el trabajo de Forensic Architecture. Desde el campo de la visualidad, ustedes están recopilando imágenes, están también produciendo imágenes a través de formas de modelización, ¿no es cierto?, de datos. Y sabemos que en este momento de hegemonía visual en el cual vivimos, la visualidad es un campo minado, puede llevar a lecturas quizás distraídas o sujetas a manipulación. Entonces, me gustaría preguntarte si ustedes en el momento de hacer sus obras están pensando justamente en como organización de imágenes, composición de un relato que podría justamente como transformar esta visualidad en un ejercicio necesariamente reflexivo y crítico, más allá de la capa informativa que están trayendo. Gracias.
Of course. I mean, let me use the word aesthetics. In our director, Eyal Weizman, in his book on investigative aesthetics, he kind of tries to address, like think on aesthetics from its kind of like in its original sense before it was taken over by the Germans. And it's kind of like Greek etymology as a way of sensing and sense making, both of them, right? So what aesthetics does is that it heightens senses and it enables making sense of a context, both of them at the same time. And I think it's really with that lens that we think about aesthetics, that we carefully choose every kind of like everything from the line weights to colors, to the way that a body is pictured, to the kind of like to the level of resolution that a building is modeled in. These are all aesthetic questions that are not, I'm not using it as I say, I'm not saying it in terms of, you know, beauty, but I'm saying it in terms of sensing and sense making. It's with that kind of commitment that we think about every aesthetic question. And I think instead of there are times, of course, that we have decided not to show something, that we've decided that a visual kind of like a particular aesthetic is not useful in a particular forum, and we've kind of reverted to another kind of a language. But I think, you know, like as in a way, this is a concern. This is something that we think about quite critically each and every time. Thank you so much, Joe. I'm really sorry I have to run, but thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the for the rigorous questions, actually. I really appreciate them. Okay.
Muchas gracias.
Bye-bye. Okay. That's fine. See you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
10 minutos más o menos, y nos encontramos en 10 minutos para escuchar las presentaciones y lo que nos va a compartir Mónica Díaz Vera, Cristian Gómez Moya, Javier Amansi y Karina Riquelme Viveros. Afuera hay café y galletitas, creo, para que vayan.